He was a king, a general, and a legend. In just 12 years, Alexander the Great built an empire that stretched across 3 continents, a mosaic of nations united under a single, brilliant, and relentless will. We remember the battles, the thunder of hooves at Gaugamela, the siege engines at Tyre, the clash of spear and shield against the might of Persia. We remember the conqueror. But what if his greatest achievement wasn't the empire he built, but the world he left behind when it shattered? What if his true legacy wasn't carved in territory, but in culture, in ideas, and in the very fabric of history itself? This is the story of how one man's ambition changed the world forever.
356 BC, Macedonia. Alexander wasn't born into luxury. He was forged in ambition. His father, Philip II, was already transforming Macedonia from a backwater kingdom into Greece's dominant power. But his mother, Olympias, she was something else entirely. This woman claimed descent from Achilles and whispered to young Alexander that his real father might be Zeus himself. At age 12, something incredible happened. A horse trader brought an enormous black stallion to Philip's court, wild, unbreakable, worth 13 talents. That's roughly $500,000 today. Every expert failed to tame it. Then 12-year-old Alexander noticed something nobody else saw. The horse was afraid of its own shadow. He turned the horse toward the sun, calmed it, and mounted it in one fluid motion. Philip reportedly wept with pride and said, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small." That horse, Bucephalus, they'd conquer the world together. But the game changer came at 13. Philip hired Aristotle, yes, that Aristotle, as Alexander's tutor. For 3 years, the greatest philosopher alive taught the future conqueror everything: logic, ethics, politics, medicine, and most crucially, how to think. Then, in 336 BC, everything changed. Philip was assassinated at his daughter's wedding by his own bodyguard. The 20-year-old prince was now king of Macedonia, facing a Greece ready to rebel, and an empire in Persia that had been threatening Greek independence for generations. Most would have played it safe. Alexander, he was just getting started. Alexander's first move: crush every rebellion in Greece so completely that no one would dare challenge him again. When Thebes revolted, he didn't just defeat them, he erased the city from the map, selling 30,000 people into slavery. Harsh? Absolutely. Effective. The rest of Greece got the message. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia with 32,000 infantry and 5,100 cavalry. His war chest almost empty. His plan? Live off conquest or die trying. And right off the bat, he did something that would become legendary. At Gordium, he encountered the famous Gordian knot, an impossibly complex knot tied to a chariot. Legend said whoever untied it would rule all of Asia. Alexander studied it for a moment, then drew his sword and sliced clean through it. "I have untied it," he declared. Sometimes the best solution is the simplest. His first major test came at the Granicus River. The Persians were waiting with 20,000 troops on the far bank. Any sane commander would have found another crossing. Alexander? He led the charge personally, plunging his horse into the river with the enemy raining javelins down on them. He nearly died. A Persian noble split his helmet with an axe before being cut down by Alexander's companion Cleitus. Victory at Granicus opened all of Asia Minor, but the real prize was further east. At Issus in 333 BC, Alexander faced Darius III, the king of kings himself, with an army of 100,000 Persians. But here's the brilliant part. Darius chose a narrow battlefield between mountains and sea, negating his numerical advantage. Alexander saw the trap and turned it into an opportunity. He used his famous hammer and anvil tactic. The Macedonian phalanx fixed the enemy in place, while Alexander led his companion cavalry in a devastating charge directly at Darius. When the Persian king saw this wild-haired Macedonian thundering straight toward him, he fled. The victory was so complete that Alexander captured Darius's entire family, his mother, wife, and daughters. But here's what made Alexander different. He treated them with honor, even adopting Persian court customs to show respect. The ultimate prize came in 331 BC at Gaugamela. Darius had chosen perfect ground this time, a vast plain where his 250,000 troops could deploy fully. He even had the battlefield leveled to help his war chariots. Alexander was outnumbered 5-1, but he had something Darius didn't: absolute confidence in his men and a tactical genius that bordered on supernatural. He feinted right, drew Darius's attention, then struck like lightning through a gap in the Persian line. When the dust settled, the Achaemenid Empire, which had ruled for over 200 years, was finished. Alexander was now king of Asia, master of treasures worth billions in today's money. And then he did something unprecedented. Instead of ruling as a conqueror, he began to rule as a Persian king. He wore Persian dress, adopted Persian ceremonies, even married Persian noblewomen. His message was clear. This wasn't occupation, it was fusion. But some of his own men weren't happy with that. By 327 BC, Alexander had been marching and fighting for 7 years. His army had traveled over 17,000 miles. They'd crossed deserts, mountains, and rivers most Greeks had never even heard of. But Alexander wasn't done. He wanted to reach the edge of the world. In India, he faced something completely new: King Porus and his war elephants at the Hydaspes River. Picture this: 200 massive elephants, each carrying a howdah full of archers, charging into your ranks while monsoon rains turn the battlefield into mud. The Macedonian phalanx had never faced anything like it. The horses were terrified, men were trampled. But Alexander adapted. He used his cavalry to attack the elephants from behind, targeting the mahouts, the elephant drivers. Without guidance, the confused elephants began trampling their own troops. When Porus was captured, wounded and bloodied, Alexander asked him how he wished to be treated. Porus's response: "As a king should treat another king." Alexander was so impressed, he not only freed Porus but made him an ally and governor of his own lands. But victory came at a cost. Alexander wanted to push further east, to the Ganges, maybe to the very edge of the world. His men, they'd had enough. At the Hyphasis River, for the first time in his life, Alexander's army said no. These weren't cowards. These were veterans who'd followed him through hell for 8 years. But they were homesick, exhausted, and frankly terrified of the rumors they were hearing about the armies waiting further east. Hundreds of thousands of troops, thousands more elephants. For 3 days, Alexander sulked in his tent, refusing to speak to anyone. The man who'd never lost a battle had lost something more important: his army's faith in his vision. Finally, he emerged and announced they would turn back. The return journey was a nightmare. Alexander chose to march through the Gedrosian Desert, modern-day Pakistan, as a shortcut. It was one of his few strategic mistakes. Heat, thirst, and disease killed more of his men than all his battles combined. By 323 BC, they'd reached Babylon. Alexander was planning new campaigns: Arabia, maybe even the Western Mediterranean. But on June 10th, after a night of heavy drinking, he fell violently ill. For 10 days he burned with fever. His commanders asked who should inherit the empire. Alexander's response, according to some sources, "To the strongest." Others say he was too weak to speak and only pointed to his signet ring. At 32 years old, Alexander the Great was dead. In just 13 years, he'd built the largest empire the world had ever seen. And in a single moment, it all began to fall apart.